If you have been involved in the Jeffrey Marsh conversation in any way, you will know that TikTok has not been a pleasant place of late. However, I am a firm believer that every opportunity, whether negative or positive, is an opportunity for learning and growth. So allow me to make this situation into a teachable moment. Because whilst I do believe that this is very much a transphobic issue, I am seeing the same excuses again and again. I'm not transphobic, Jeffrey Marsh just gives me the ick. I'm not transphobic, Jeffrey Marsh just gives me bad vibes. I'm not transphobic, I love Dylan Mulvaney, but Jeffrey Marsh, no. Now there's actually a scientific reason for this, a psychological reason for this, and it all happens in the brain. So for the purpose of this educational video, I'm going to put my psychologist hat on and talk to you about why some of you who do not believe that you are transphobic are getting this negative response to Jeffrey Marsh. And I would like to preface this video by saying I will be using scientific language, I will be using gendered language, I will be using stereotypes, and I am going to be purposely obtuse at times because this is a teachable moment. It's also going to be a long video. Get yourself a brew. Now, I can sit here and tell you that this processing happens within the cerebral cortex, which is the largest part of your brain, and then that information is transmitted via the subcortex, which is underneath the cerebral cortex. Now, not everybody knows what those terms mean, and that is fine. The brain, it's not really like a computer, because scientists will argue that sentence, but it does store and file information. So I would like you to think of the brain right now as some kind of storing facility, whether that is a computer storage filing system or an old-fashioned filing cabinet or a storeroom. Think of it as a storeroom. I learned through visual imagery. Hopefully this will help. Your brain is constantly processing information. Every sight, every sound, every smell, every taste, every touch, every thought, every emotion, it's all being stored somewhere, somehow in the brain. You might not remember the Shakespeare passage that you've read over and over, but you will remember the words to Happy Birthday, and there probably will be an emotion attached to each piece of information. This is a stimulus response. So let's say you meet a new person and you are processing the information, what they look like, what they sound like, what they're saying, whether what they're saying makes you feel good or bad. And your response is either going to be negative or positive, and it will be filed as negative or positive. But often you will already need the blueprint to be able to file something as negative or positive. So let's do a comparison between Jeffrey Marsh and Dylan Mulvaney. That's Dylan and Jeffrey. Dylan Mulvaney is a very famous trans woman. Jeffrey Marsh is a very famous non-binary person. Straight away, there's a difference. Now, a lot of this comes down to your knowledge, education, and experience of the LGBT community. It's actually easier for the brain to process a trans woman than a non-binary person. Although not at all simplistic, a trans woman is someone who was born male and transitioned to female. That's the simplistic way. It's easy to see that. Was that, is this. Okay, you've seen the transition. It's easier to understand. Now, the concept of non-binary is nothing new. There have been non-binary people for as long as there have been people. You only need to go and research ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and you'll see how far back this goes. The term non-binary, however, is fairly new. So this comes down to linguistics and epistemology. I'm going to out myself here. I have found the term non-binary much harder to process and understand. Now, because I'm a visual learner, when I hear words, I see pictures. So if someone said to me, gender fluid, I totally understood that. I totally knew what that meant, because water flows. So unless you contain water in a glass, in which case male or female, it's a male glass or a female glass, that water is going to flow and it's not trapped anywhere. Trapped is probably the wrong word, categorized. Whenever somebody says non-binary, I think of the Matrix. Every single time. This is binary. It's a series of ones and zeros. It looks like the Matrix, right? For the purposes of this video, I am going to say that 1 is male and 0 is female. So to be binary, you either have to be a 0 or a 1. If you are non-binary, you are neither or both, which goes against the whole system. And even for me, that has been harder to process and understand. I get it now, but it took me a really long time because the term is quite technical. Or maybe that's just a me thing, could be. There is also a thinking and a bias that non-binary people have choices. Just like there is a lot of bias towards bisexual people, that they also choose their sexuality. That will be a whole other video, but that is a bias. Non-binary is not a choice. It is what you are. Neither 1 nor 0. Maybe sometimes 1, maybe sometimes 0, maybe never either. Okay, but what does this have to do with Jeffrey Marsh and Dylan Mulvaney and Jeffrey Marsh giving you the ick? Okay, well, we're going to break it down. Let's start with the identifying terms, Dylan and Jeffrey. Your brain is going to process that identifying information. Dylan is a unisex name, so Dylan could be assigned to a male or female. So it kind of makes sense that a trans woman is called Dylan. That will make sense in your brain with the blueprint that you have. Now, Jeffrey is historically a male name. Society will tell you that Jeffrey is a male name. So your brain wants to put Jeffrey into the male box. Now, if you look at Dylan, Dylan oozes femininity. Dylan is petite, Dylan is pretty, Dylan is very soft-spoken. Everything about Dylan says feminine. If you saw Dylan and didn't know her history, you wouldn't necessarily think that she is a trans woman. You would think that she is a woman. Your brain can process that. Your brain is going to put Dylan in the female box. Now let's look at Jeffrey. Okay. Now we're already struggling with the name because Jeffrey predominantly is a male name. Jeffrey does not have the same feminine features that Dylan has. Being obtuse, Jeffrey looks like a man in makeup and a dress. Jeffrey has stubble. Jeffrey has short hair. These are things that society have told us is more masculine and therefore male. So your brain is trying to put Jeffrey in the male box. But Jeffrey's wearing makeup. Jeffrey is wearing female clothed. Jeffrey is speaking in a high-pitched feminine voice. Your brain is going to get confused if you don't already have a non-binary file within your brain. Which is why so many members of the trans community are supporting Jeffrey, because they understand non-binary. People who don't have that experience are confused. But why does it give you the ick? When the brain processes information, it gets transferred from the cerebral cortex via the subcortex to the amygdala. Now, the amygdala is the part of the brain that perceives a threat. It also stores emotions. This ties to the fight or flight response that has kept human civilization alive. Now, when the amygdala perceives a threat, it will contact the hypothalamus, which stimulates the central nervous system. And basically, you get loads of hormones pumping through your body. That is the fight or flight response. If you were to walk into your garden and there was a tiger in the garden, your fight and flight response is going to kick in. Now, Jeffrey Marsh is not a physical threat. They are a psychological threat if you do not understand non-binary. Because your brain does not know where to put that information. Your brain is going to perceive that information as threatening. So you will get those stress hormones going through your body. You might feel anxious, you might feel sick. You're ready to run or fight. Obviously not to the same level as a tiger in your garden. Because you do not understand Jeffrey Marsh, you see Jeffrey Marsh as a threat. And then there's confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is when you will do research to prove your opinion or theory. Only your opinion, your theory, or to back up your feeling, rather than doing any objective research. An example of this would be the statement that black men are criminals. That's a bold statement. Have you got any evidence to prove that? Well, according to statistics, there are proportionately more black males incarcerated than there are white males. So if you have a racist agenda, you're going to use that piece of information, but it's not enough. Got to look at why, and that comes down to systemic racism. Black males are more likely to be stopped and searched, arrested, charged with the crime and sent to prison than a white male. So if you think that Jeffrey Marsh gives you bad vibes and you hear a rumour that they're talking to children, you're going to believe it because that rumour backs up your feeling. and you haven't done your due diligence in checking because there's no evidence. It's your brain.